The morning sun blazed over Camp Pendleton as Sarah Mitchell adjusted her worn baseball cap and stretched her legs near the starting line of the infamous Marine Corps obstacle course. At 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighing barely 120 pounds, she looked like she had wandered into the wrong place entirely. Her faded civilian workout clothes hung loosely on her small frame, and her sneakers had seen better days. To the group of Marines gathering around the course, she appeared to be nothing more than a curious civilian who had somehow gained access to their sacred training ground. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was the first to notice her presence. A mountain of a man with arms like tree trunks and a chest that could serve as a small table, he had been running Marines through this course for over 8 years. He had seen every type of recruit, every kind of wannabe, and every species of overconfident civilian who thought they could handle military training. Sarah, however, was something entirely different. She was quiet, almost invisible, standing there with her hands in her pockets as she studied the course layout with an intensity that seemed oddly professional. "Hey there, miss," Rodriguez called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been questioned. "This is a restricted military training area. Civilians aren't allowed here without proper authorization." Sarah turned toward him with a gentle smile that immediately disarmed his aggressive tone. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the morning wind. "I was told I could observe today's training session. I have permission from Colonel Henderson." The mention of their commanding officer's name made Rodriguez pause, but only for a moment. Colonel Henderson was known for occasionally allowing journalists or military contractors to observe training exercises, usually as part of some publicity effort or equipment demonstration. Looking at Sarah's unremarkable appearance, Rodriguez assumed she was probably a reporter from some small-town newspaper, here to write a feel-good story about Marine training. "All right then," Rodriguez said with a shrug. "But stay back and don't interfere with the training. These Marines have serious work to do." As if summoned by his words, a group of 12 Marines jogged up to the starting line. They were all in peak physical condition, their muscles clearly defined even beneath their standard-issue training uniforms. Each one carried themselves with the confidence that came from months of rigorous training and the knowledge that they were among the elite fighting forces in the world. They had conquered every challenge a Marine Corps had thrown at them, and this obstacle course was just another opportunity to prove their superiority. Corporal Jenkins, a tall redhead from Texas with arms covered in elaborate tattoos, was the first to notice Sarah standing nearby. Well, he said loudly, making sure his voice carried to his fellow Marines. "Looks like we got ourselves an audience today, boys." The other Marines turned to look, and immediately a wave of barely suppressed laughter rippled through the group. Private Martinez, a compact but powerfully built man from California, shook his head in disbelief. "Seriously? They're letting civilians watch us now? What's next? Selling tickets?" "Maybe she's here to take notes," suggested Lance Corporal Williams, a broad-shouldered African-American Marine with a gold tooth that glinted when he smiled. Learn how real warriors train so she can write about it in her diary." The comments grew bolder as the Marines fed off each other's energy. They had spent months proving themselves against the toughest standards in the military, and the presence of this small, unassuming woman somehow felt like an insult to their accomplishments. Here they were, elite fighting machines, and their training was being treated like some kind of tourist attraction. "I bet she couldn't even climb over the first wall," Private Thompson called out, pointing to the 8-foot wooden barrier that marked the beginning of the course. "Look at those skinny arms. She probably needs help opening pickle jars." Sarah listened to their comments without any visible reaction. She simply stood there with her hands clasped behind her back, studying the course with the same quiet intensity she had shown earlier. The obstacle course stretched for nearly a quarter mile and included every possible challenge the military could devise. There were walls to climb, ropes to traverse, mud pits to crawl through, and carrying exercises that would test both strength and endurance. It was a course designed to break down even the strongest individuals and rebuild them as Marines. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez felt obligated to defend the civilian, if only to maintain some semblance of military discipline. "That's enough chatter," he barked. "Focus on your own performance instead of worrying about spectators." But the damage was already done. The Marines had found their entertainment for the day, and they weren't about to let it go. As they lined up for the start of their timed run, the jokes continued to flow freely. "Hey, miss," Corporal Jenkins called out. "You might want to step back a little further. When we start moving, there's going to be a lot of dust and probably some flying mud. We don't want to ruin that nice, clean outfit of yours." "Yeah," added Private Martinez. "This isn't exactly a yoga class. Things get pretty intense out here." Sarah nodded politely and took a few steps back, but she didn't retreat to the observation area that Rodriguez had indicated. Instead, she positioned herself where she could see the entire course clearly, her eyes tracking every obstacle and every potential challenge point with the methodical precision of someone conducting a professional assessment. The whistle blow that started the exercise was sharp and commanding, cutting through the morning air like a blade. The 12 Marines exploded in emotion, their powerful legs driving them forward as they sprinted toward the first obstacle. They moved with the synchronized precision of a well-oiled machine, each one pushing themselves to maintain pace with their fellow Marines while also trying to establish individual dominance. The first challenge was a series of low barriers that require the Marines to dive over and roll back to their feet without losing momentum. One by one, they sailed over the obstacles, their bodies moving with a fluid grace that came from countless hours of practice. The sound of their boots hitting the ground created a rhythmic drumbeat that echoed across the training field. From her position on the sidelines, Sarah watched with the detached interest of someone observing a familiar routine. Her eyes didn't follow the spectacle of the Marines' athletic performance. Instead, she focused on the technical aspects of their movement, noting inefficiencies in their form and missed opportunities for better time management. To the casual observer, she might have appeared bored or disinterested, but in reality, she was conducting a detailed analysis of everything she saw. The second obstacle was the rope climb, a 30-foot vertical challenge that separated the strong from the weak. The Marines attacked it with varying degrees of success. Corporal Jenkins, despite his earlier bravado, struggled with his technique and took nearly 40 seconds to reach the top. Private Martinez, whose compact build was better suited to the task, made it look almost effortless. The differences in their performance were subtle but significant, and Sarah noted each variation with the eye of someone who understood exactly what those differences meant. As the Marines moved through the course, their initial confidence began to show cracks. The obstacle course was designed to be difficult, and even these elite soldiers found themselves challenged by its demands. Sweat began to pour down their faces, and their breathing became labored as they pushed their bodies to the limit. "Come on, Jenkins," shouted Williams as he passed his struggling teammate. "My grandmother could climb that rope faster than you." The trash talk continued, but it was now mixed with genuine effort and determination. These Marines had their pride on the line, and they weren't about to let a bad performance stand as their legacy. They pushed harder, fought through the pain, and demonstrated exactly why they had earned the title of United States Marine. But Sarah wasn't impressed by their determination or their obvious physical conditioning. She had seen this level of performance before, and she knew that while these Marines were certainly capable soldiers, they were operating at a level that was merely adequate rather than exceptional. Their technique was sound but not refined, their strategy was basic but not sophisticated, and their teamwork was functional but not seamless. The mud crawl was where the first real casualty occurred. Private Thompson, who had been so vocal about Sarah's perceived weakness earlier, found himself stuck halfway through the obstacle. The combination of mud, barbed wire, and his own exhaustion had overwhelmed him, and he was forced to call for assistance from his fellow Marines. The irony was not lost on anyone, least of all Sarah, who watched the rescue unfold with the same quiet attention she had given everything else. "Need a hand there," Thompson called out Williams, his voice carrying just enough sarcasm to make his point clear. "Shut up and help me." Thompson gasped, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. It took 3 Marines working together to extract Thompson from the mud pit, and by the time they had accomplished the rescue, their team time had suffered significantly. The mood among the group had shifted from playful arrogance to serious concern about their performance. They still had half the course to complete, and they were already behind their target pace. Sarah observed the rescue operation with professional interest. She noted how the Marines had worked together to solve the problem, but she also saw the wasted motion and poor communication that had made the process more difficult than it needed to be. In a real combat situation, those inefficiencies could mean the difference between life and death. The wall climb that came next was a 20-foot vertical barrier that required both upper body strength and climbing technique. It was here that the Marines' individual limitations became most apparent. While all of them eventually made it over the wall, their methods varied wildly in terms of efficiency and energy expenditure. Some attacked it with brute force, while others tried to use technique to compensate for their physical limitations. None of them demonstrated the kind of effortless competence that marked a true expert. As Sarah continued to watch, she found herself automatically calculating how she would tackle each obstacle. Her mental approach was different from what she was observing. Where the Marines relied primarily on strength and determination, she thought in terms of leverage, momentum, and energy conservation. Where they saw individual challenges to be conquered through personal effort, she saw an integrated system that could be navigated through proper planning and technique. The tire run was particularly revealing. The Marines had to navigate through a field of tires placed at irregular intervals, requiring quick footwork and constant balance adjustments. Several of them stumbled or lost their footing, and their time suffered as a result. Sarah could see that they were approaching the obstacle with their heads down, focusing on each individual tire rather than reading the pattern and planning their route in advance. By the time the Marines reached the final obstacles, their initial cockiness had been completely replaced by grim determination. They were all breathing heavily. Their uniforms were soaked with sweat and mud, and several of them were nursing minor injuries from their encounters with the various challenges. The obstacle course had done exactly what it was designed to do. It had tested their limits and found them wanting in several areas. The rope traverse was the second to last challenge, requiring the Marines to cross a 30-foot gap using only an overhead rope. It was a test of upper body strength, grip endurance, and mental toughness. One by one, they made their way across, some with relative ease, and others struggling to maintain their grip as fatigue set in. Lance Corporal Williams, who had been one of the most vocal critics of Sarah's presence, found himself in serious trouble halfway across the rope. His hands were slipping, his arms were shaking with exhaustion, and it was clear that he was in danger of falling. The drop wasn't life-threatening, but it would be both physically painful and professionally embarrassing. "Hold on, Williams," shouted Rodriguez from the ground below. "Don't you dare let go." Williams managed to complete the traverse, but just barely. By the time he dropped to the ground on the far side, he was completely spent. His hands were raw and bleeding, and his face was pale with exhaustion. The course had pushed him to his absolute limit, and everyone could see it. The final obstacle was a simple sprint to the finish line, but for these exhausted Marines, even that seemed like a monumental challenge. They forced their aching legs to carry them forward, driven more by pride than by any remaining reserves of energy. When the last Marine finally crossed the finish line, the group collapsed in various states of exhaustion, their chest heaving as they fought to catch their breath. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez looked at his stopwatch and shook his head. The overall time was acceptable, but not impressive. These Marines had completed the course, but their performance had been marked by inefficiency, poor technique, and several near failures. It was exactly the kind of run that would require extensive debriefing and additional training to address the identified weaknesses. As the Marines slowly picked themselves up off the ground and began to assess their performance, Sarah stepped forward from her observation position. The movement was so quiet and subtle that several of the Marines didn't notice her approach until she was standing right next to them. "Excuse me," she said in the same soft voice she had used earlier. "That was really impressive. You all worked very hard out there." The compliment felt patronizing to the Marines, who were already feeling embarrassed about their performance. Here was this small civilian woman offering them encouragement like they were children who had just finished a school field day. It was exactly the kind of condescending praise that made their blood boil. "Thanks," Corporal Jenkins said tersely, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I'm sure you learned a lot watching real Marines in action." "I did," Sarah replied seriously. "I noticed some really interesting techniques, especially during the mud crawl sequence." Private Thompson, who had been the one requiring rescue during that particular obstacle, felt his face flush with embarrassment and anger. "Oh, really? And what exactly did you learn from watching me get stuck?" Sarah looked at him with genuine curiosity rather than judgment. "I was wondering why you chose to go through that section on your belly instead of using a modified side crawl technique. It looked like the wire height would have allowed for better mobility with a different approach." The technical nature of her comment caught the Marines off guard. Most civilians who observed military training focused on the obvious aspects like speed and strength. Sarah was discussing specific tactical choices and technique modifications. It suggested a level of understanding that didn't match her appearance or her stated role as an observer. "What would you know about proper crawling technique?" asked Private Martinez, his tone challenging. "Have you ever been under fire? Have you ever had to crawl through mud to save your life?" Sarah considered the question for a moment, and the Marines noticed something different in her expression. The gentle, almost submissive demeanor she had maintained throughout the morning seemed to shift slightly, revealing a hint of something harder underneath. "No," she said finally, "I haven't been under fire while crawling through mud." The admission seemed to satisfy the Marines' need to establish their superior experience, but there was something about the way Sarah had phrased her answer that left them feeling vaguely unsettled. She had answered the literal question without addressing the broader implication, and there was a precision to her words that suggested careful consideration rather than simple honesty. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez decided to intervene before the conversation could escalate further. "All right, Marines, that's enough socializing. You need to clean your gear and prepare for the debrief session. We got a lot to discuss about today's performance." As the Marines began to gather their equipment and prepare to leave, Sarah remained standing near the finish line. She was looking back over the course they had just completed, her eyes tracing the path from obstacle to obstacle with the same analytical intensity she had shown throughout the morning. "Thinking about giving it a try yourself?" asked Corporal Jenkins, unable to resist one final jab. "I bet Colonel Henderson would let you take a shot at it, just for fun." The suggestion was clearly meant as a joke, a way to emphasize the absurdity of a civilian attempting something that had just challenged 12 trained Marines. But instead of laughing or declining politely, Sarah turned to face him with an expression that was suddenly much more serious. "Actually," she said, "that's not a bad idea." The Marines stopped what they were doing and stared at her in disbelief. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez shook his head firmly. "Ma'am, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this course is designed for trained military personnel. It's not a playground, and it's definitely not safe for civilians." "I understand the risks," Sarah replied calmly, "and I'm willing to sign whatever liability waivers are necessary. But I'd really like to try it." The request was so unexpected that nobody knew how to respond. The Marines looked at each other with expressions of amazement and amusement, wondering if they were about to witness the most spectacular failure in the history of Camp Pendleton. This small, quiet civilian woman was seriously proposing to attempt an obstacle course that had just pushed 12 elite Marines to their limits. Private Williams was the first to find his voice. "Lady, are you out of your mind? Did you not just watch what happened to us out there? We're trained killers, and that course almost killed us." "I saw," Sarah said simply, "but I also saw some opportunities for improvement." The statement hung in the air like a challenge, and The Marines felt their collective pride bristle at the implication. Here was a civilian suggesting that she could somehow perform better than they had. It was beyond insulting. It was delusional. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez knew he should shut down this conversation immediately. Allowing a civilian to attempt the obstacle course would be a violation of multiple regulations, and if she got injured, his career would be over. But there was something about Sarah's quiet confidence that intrigued him. She wasn't displaying the kind of bravado he usually associated with overconfident civilians. Instead, she seemed genuinely analytical about the challenge, as if she were approaching it as a problem to be solved rather than a test to be endured. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "even if I wanted to allow this, which I don't, I would need written authorization from Colonel Henderson himself. This isn't something I can approve on my own." "I understand," Sarah replied. "Would it be possible to contact him?" The Marines exchanged glances that mixed disbelief with anticipation. They were torn between wanting to protect this delusional woman from herself and wanting to see her humiliated by the course. Either way, the situation had become far more entertaining than their morning training session. Rodriguez pulled out his radio and stepped away from the group. His conversation with Colonel Henderson was brief and conducted in low tones that prevented the others from hearing the details. When he returned, his expression was one of confused resignation. "Colonel Henderson will be here in 15 minutes, he announced. "He wants to assess the situation personally before making any decisions." The news sent a ripple of excitement through the Marines. Colonel Henderson was a legendary figure at Camp Pendleton, a career military officer who had seen combat in multiple theaters and had never been known to back down from any challenge. If he was coming to evaluate this civilian's request, it meant that something significant was happening. As they waited for the colonel's arrival, the Marines began placing informal bets on what would happen. Some thought Sarah would come to her senses and withdraw her request once she met Henderson face to face. Others believed she would attempt the course and fail spectacularly within the first few obstacles. Nobody thought she had any chance of actually completing the challenge. Sarah, meanwhile, used the waiting time to conduct a more detailed examination of the course. She walked slowly along the perimeter, studying each obstacle from multiple angles and making mental notes about optimal approach strategies. Her behavior was methodical and professional, more like a military engineer conducting a site survey than a civilian preparing for a recreational challenge. The Marines watched her reconnaissance with growing unease. Her approach was too systematic, too knowledgeable for someone with no military background. She was identifying key decision points and potential problem areas with an expertise that didn't match her supposed civilian status. For the first time since the morning had begun, some of them started to wonder if there was more to Sarah Mitchell than met the eye. When Colonel Henderson's vehicle appeared in the distance, the Marines automatically straightened their posture and prepared for inspection. Henderson was not just their commanding officer. He was a symbol of everything they aspired to become as Marines. His approval meant everything to them, and his disapproval could end careers. As the vehicle approached, Sarah made one final adjustment to her baseball cap and took a deep breath. The morning had unfolded exactly as she had expected, but the next phase would require her to make some difficult decisions about how much of herself she was willing to reveal. The Marines thought they knew who she was, but they were about to discover that their assumptions had been completely wrong from the very beginning. Colonel Henderson stepped out of his vehicle with the bearing of a man who had commanded respect for over 2 decades. At 54 years old, he possessed the kind of presence that made grown Marines stand straighter just by walking into a room. His silver hair was cut in the regulation military style, and his uniform was pressed to perfection. Every decoration on his chest told a story of courage under fire, and his weathered hand spoke of years spent leading men into combat. As he approached the group gathered around the obstacle course, his sharp blue eyes immediately found Sarah Mitchell. She stood apart from the Marines, her civilian clothes and small stature making her seem almost invisible next to the uniformed soldiers. But Henderson's trained eye caught something the others had missed. The way she held herself, the careful positioning of her feet, the subtle alertness in her posture. These were details that spoke of extensive military training. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, Henderson called out as he drew near. I understand we have an unusual situation here. Yes, sir, Rodriguez replied, snapping to attention. This civilian observer has requested permission to attempt the obstacle course. I told her it would require your direct authorization. Henderson turned his attention to Sarah, studying her with the analytical gaze of someone who had spent years evaluating personnel under his command. Mom, I'm Colonel Henderson. I understand you're interested in trying our course. May I ask what prompted this request? Sarah met his gaze directly, and Henderson immediately noticed that she didn't display the nervous deference most civilians showed when meeting a senior military officer. Instead, her eyes held the steady confidence of someone comfortable with authority figures. Colonel, she said with quiet respect, I've been observing this morning's training session, and I believe I might be able to complete the course using different techniques than what I observed. I'd like the opportunity to test that theory. The Marines exchanged glances of amazement. Not only was this civilian woman seriously proposing to attempt their course, but she was suggesting that she could somehow improve upon their performance. The audacity was breathtaking. Henderson, however, was more intrigued than amused. Something about Sarah's manner reminded him of the special operations personnel he had worked with during his career. There was a quiet professionalism in her approach that didn't match her civilian appearance. What's your background, if you don't mind me asking? Henderson inquired. Have you had any military training or experience with obstacle courses? Sarah paused for a moment, and the Marines noticed that she seemed to be carefully considering her response. I've had some experience with physical training programs, she said finally. Nothing quite like this, but I'm familiar with the general principles. It was a deliberately vague answer, and Henderson recognized it as such. In his experience, people who gave evasive responses about their background usually had something to hide. The question was whether that something was embarrassing civilian inexperience or something more significant. Corporal Jenkins couldn't contain himself any longer. Sir, with all due respect, we just ran this course and barely made acceptable time. There's no way a civilian could. Did I ask for your opinion, Corporal? Henderson's voice cut through Jenkins' protest like a knife. The Marine immediately fell silent, his face flushing with embarrassment. Henderson turned back to Sarah. Ms. Mitchell, I have to tell you that this course is specifically designed to challenge trained military personnel. It's not just physically demanding, it's potentially dangerous. Several obstacles could result in serious injury if not approached correctly. Understand the risks, Colonel, Sarah replied, and I'm prepared to accept full responsibility for my safety. I'm also willing to sign whatever liability documentation you require. The confident way she spoke about liability and risk assessment struck Henderson as oddly professional. Most civilians would be nervous about such matters, but Sarah was addressing them like someone with experience in military protocol. Private Martinez stepped forward with barely controlled frustration. Colonel, sir, this is insane. We've been training for months to build up to this level of performance. You can't just let some random civilian walk in, and Corporal Martinez, Henderson interrupted, his tone carrying a warning. You seem to forget that I make the decisions here, not you. The rebuke stung, but Martinez had made a point that resonated with all the Marines. They had worked incredibly hard to reach their current level of fitness and skill. The idea that a civilian might somehow surpass their performance felt like a direct attack on everything they had accomplished. Henderson walked over to the starting line of the obstacle course and looked back over the challenges that lay ahead. The morning sun was climbing higher, and the heat was beginning to build. If he was going to allow this attempt, it would need to happen soon before the conditions became even more difficult. Ms. Mitchell, he called out, assuming I were to authorize this attempt, what makes you think you could succeed where trained Marines found the course challenging? Sarah joined him at the starting line, and once again the Marines noticed something different about her movement. She didn't walk. She moved with a fluid efficiency that suggested extensive physical conditioning. Her steps were measured and purposeful, and she covered ground faster than her small stature would suggest. From my observation, Sarah said, studying the course layout, I noticed several opportunities for improved efficiency. Different body positioning during the crawl sections, better momentum management on the rope obstacles, and more strategic energy conservation throughout the overall sequence. Her analysis was detailed and technical, using terminology that suggested a deep understanding of physical performance principles. The Marines found themselves listening despite their skepticism, recognizing that her approach was more sophisticated than they had expected. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez felt obligated to voice his concerns. Colonel, even if she has some theoretical knowledge, the physical demands alone, are you questioning my assessment capabilities, Staff Sergeant? Henderson's interruption carried the weight of absolute authority. Rodriguez immediately backed down. Henderson had made his decision, though he wasn't entirely sure why. There was something about Sarah Mitchell that didn't add up, and his instincts told him that allowing her to attempt the course might reveal more than it would conceal. In his experience, people were most honest about themselves when they were pushed to their limits. Very well, he announced. I'm authorizing this attempt. However, there will be conditions. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez will accompany you throughout the course to ensure safety protocols are followed. If at any point you appear to be in danger or unable to continue, the exercise will be terminated immediately. The Marines stared at their commanding officer in shock. Colonel Henderson was known for his conservative approach to risk management, and his decision to allow this civilian attempt seemed completely out of character. Sarah nodded her acceptance of the conditions. I understand, Colonel. Thank you for the opportunity. As she walked back toward the starting line, the Marines began placing new bets on how quickly she would fail. Private Thompson, still embarrassed about his own difficulties during the mud crawl, was particularly vocal about his expectations. I give her 30 seconds, he announced loudly. She'll take one look at that first wall and realize she's made a huge mistake. Lance Corporal Williams laughed. 30 seconds? You're being generous. I bet she doesn't even make it to the wall. One look at the sprint distance, and she'll be calling for a timeout. But as Sarah began her pre-exercise preparation routine, their laughter started to fade. Instead of the stretching and warm-up exercises they expected from a civilian, she moved through a series of precise movements that looked almost ceremonial in their exactness. Her flexibility was remarkable, and her balance was perfect. Most tellingly, she performed each movement with the kind of muscle memory that came only from years of repetitive practice. Where did she learn to stretch like that? Private Martinez asked quietly. That's not normal gym stuff. Indeed, Sarah's preparation routine looked more like something taught in special operations training than civilian fitness programs. She was activating specific muscle groups in a sequence that suggested detailed knowledge of biomechanics and performance optimization. Colonel Henderson watched her preparation with growing interest. Every movement she made reinforced his suspicion that Sarah Mitchell was not what she appeared to be. The question was what she actually was, and why she was concealing her true background. Ready when you are, ma'am, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez announced, positioning himself near the course to observe her attempt. Sarah took her position at the starting line and looked back at the assembled Marines. For the first time since the morning had begun, her gentle smile carried a hint of something that might have been anticipation. Thank you all for allowing me to try this, she said. I hope I don't disappoint you. The comment struck several Marines as oddly phrased, as if she were concerned about their expectations rather than her own safety. But before anyone could analyze her words further, Colonel Henderson raised his whistle. On your mark, he called out. Sarah crouched into a runner's stance that was textbook perfect in its execution. Her body positioning demonstrated an understanding of sprint mechanics that went far beyond casual athletic experience. Set. The Marines leaned forward unconsciously, their earlier skepticism replaced by genuine curiosity about what was going to happen. Even they had to admit that Sarah's preparation had been unexpectedly professional. The whistle's sharp blast cut through the morning air, and Sarah exploded into motion with a speed that caught everyone completely off guard. Her first few steps generated more power and momentum than anyone had expected from her slight frame. She wasn't just running. She was accelerating with the controlled fury of a trained athlete. Private Williams felt his jaw drop. "Holy shit," he whispered, forgetting military protocol in his amazement. Sarah covered the distance to the first obstacle in a time that would have been respectable for any of the Marines. But more impressive than her speed was her efficiency. Every step was placed with precision, every movement served a purpose, and she approached the first wall with momentum that was perfectly calculated for the challenge ahead. The initial wall was 8 feet high and designed to test upper body strength and climbing technique. The Marines had all managed to clear it, but most had struggled with their approach and wasted energy in the process. Sarah, however, seemed to flow up and over the barrier with an elegance that made it look effortless. Her technique was flawless. Instead of trying to muscle her way over the wall like the Marines had done, she used her momentum to carry her up while her hands and feet found purchase points that maximized leverage. She was over the wall and back into her sprint before the Marines had fully processed what they had witnessed. "Did you see that?" Corporal Jenkins asked in amazement. She didn't even slow down. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was having trouble keeping up with Sarah's pace. She was moving through the course faster than any of the Marines had managed, and her technique was consistently superior to what he had observed from his trained soldiers. The second obstacle was a series of low barriers that required diving and rolling to maintain momentum. The Marines had all managed to clear them, but their form had been awkward and their transitions had been slow. Sarah approached the barriers with the fluid grace of someone who had performed this exact exercise thousands of times before. Her dives were perfect arcs that carried her over each barrier with minimal height loss. Her rolls were executed with precision, bringing her back to her feet in perfect position to continue her sprint. The entire sequence looked more like a choreographed performance than a military exercise. Colonel Henderson found himself unconsciously checking his stopwatch. Sarah was moving at a pace that was significantly faster than the Marines' combined time, and she showed no signs of slowing down or struggling with the physical demands. The rope climb that had challenged several of the Marines was Sarah's first real test. The 30-foot vertical rope required significant upper body strength, and her slight build suggested that this might be where her attempt would finally fail. The Marines gathered closer to watch, expecting to finally see her limitations exposed. But Sarah approached the rope with the same analytical precision she had shown throughout the course. Instead of grabbing the rope and trying to muscle her way up like the Marines had done, she used a technique that maximized efficiency and minimized energy expenditure. Her hands gripped the rope in a way that distributed the load optimally, and her feet worked in perfect coordination to support her ascent. She climbed the rope faster than any of the Marines had managed, reaching the top in less than 20 seconds. But more impressive than her speed was the fact that she didn't appear to be straining at all. Her breathing remained controlled, and her movement stayed smooth and purposeful. Private Thompson watched in stunned silence as Sarah descended the rope with the same effortless grace she had shown during her ascent. "This isn't possible," he said quietly. "Nobody climbs that fast without years of training." The mud crawl that had nearly defeated Thompson was next, and it was here that Sarah's true expertise became most apparent. Instead of belly crawling through the mud like the Marines had done, she used a modified side crawl technique that allowed her to move faster while staying lower. Her body positioning was perfect, and she navigated the barbed wire obstacles with a precision that suggested extensive experience with similar challenges. She emerged from the mud crawl not only faster than any of the Marines had managed, but also considerably cleaner. Her technique had minimized her contact with the mud while maximizing her speed through the obstacle. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was no longer just observing. He was studying. Everything about Sarah's performance suggested military training of the highest caliber. Her techniques were too refined, her conditioning was too specific, and Her approach was too professional for someone with merely civilian experience. The wall climb that came next was 20 feet of vertical challenge, and it was here that Sarah's true abilities became impossible to deny. She approached the wall with the confidence of someone who had climbed similar obstacles countless times before. Her technique was not just efficient, it was revolutionary. Instead of trying to find handholds and muscle her way up the wall, Sarah used a combination of momentum and leverage that allowed her to almost run up the vertical surface. Her body positioning was perfect, and her movement was so fluid that it looked more like she was defying gravity than climbing. She was over the 20-foot wall and back in her sprint in less than 15 seconds, a time that would have been exceptional even for trained special operations personnel. The Marines watched in absolute silence, their earlier mockery replaced by growing amazement and confusion. The tire run that had tripped up several Marines was executed by Sarah with a precision that bordered on the artistic. She moved through the irregular pattern of tires with flowing steps that never seemed to hesitate or adjust. It was as if she had memorized the layout during her initial observation and was now executing a perfect plan. Colonel Henderson was no longer watching a civilian attempt a military obstacle course. He was observing what appeared to be a demonstration of advanced special operations techniques by someone with extensive professional training. Every movement Sarah made reinforced his growing certainty that she was not what she claimed to be. The rope traverse that had nearly defeated Lance Corporal Williams was Sarah's next challenge. The 30-foot horizontal rope required exceptional upper body strength and grip endurance. Williams had barely managed to complete the traverse, and he was in peak physical condition. Sarah approached the rope with the same methodical precision she had shown throughout the course. But her technique for the traverse was unlike anything the Marines had ever seen. Instead of hanging from the rope and pulling herself across hand over hand, she used her entire body to create momentum and reduce the load on her arms. She crossed the 30-foot gap in less than 30 seconds, moving with such efficiency that she appeared to be floating across the rope rather than struggling with it. When she dropped to the ground on the far side, she immediately transitioned back in her sprint without any apparent need for recovery time. The Marines were no longer making jokes or placing bets. They were watching in stunned silence as a small civilian woman systematically demolished a course that had challenged them to their limits. Her performance was not just superior to theirs. It was superior by such a wide margin that it suggested an entirely different level of training and capability. Private Martinez finally found his voice. Who the hell is she? It was a question that everyone was now asking, including Colonel Henderson. Sarah's performance had moved far beyond the realm of unexpected civilian competence into the territory of professional military expertise. Her techniques were too advanced, her conditioning was too specific, and her approach was too sophisticated for someone without extensive special operations background. As Sarah approached the final sprint to the finish line, the Marines realized they were about to witness something unprecedented. Not only was this civilian going to complete their course, but she was going to do it in a time that would surpass their best individual efforts. She crossed the finish line with the same fluid grace she had maintained throughout the entire course. Her breathing was elevated but controlled, and she showed no signs of the exhaustion that had overwhelmed the Marines after their attempt. She looked like she could turn around and run the course again without difficulty. Colonel Henderson looked at his stopwatch and felt his assumptions about civilian capabilities shatter completely. Sarah's time was not just faster than the Marines' individual times. It was faster than their best combined team time. She had single-handedly outperformed an entire unit of trained Marines. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez reached the finish line, breathing hard from his effort to keep up with Sarah's pace. "Ma'am," he gasped. That was extraordinary." Sarah smiled the same gentle smile she had worn throughout the morning, but now the Marines noticed something different in her eyes. The submissive civilian observer was gone, replaced by someone with the quiet confidence of proven capability. "Thank you," she said simply. It was a well-designed course. The Marines gathered around the finish line in various states of shock and confusion. Everything they thought they knew about their own capabilities and about civilian limitations had just been turned upside down. They were elite soldiers trained to be among the best fighting forces in the world, and they had just been thoroughly outclassed by a woman in civilian clothes. Corporal Jenkins was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. "Ma'am, with all due respect, who are you? Because there's no way a civilian just did what you just did." Sarah looked at Colonel Henderson, and some kind of silent communication passed between them. The colonel nodded slightly, and Sarah's expression shifted again, revealing more of the professional competence she had been concealing. "My name is Sarah Mitchell," she said, her voice carrying a new authority. "And I think it's time I explained why I'm really here." The Marines leaned forward unconsciously, sensing that they were about to learn something that would change their understanding of everything that had happened that morning. Colonel Henderson stepped closer, his own curiosity now completely overriding his concerns about protocol and security. Sarah took a deep breath and looked at each of the Marines in turn. When she spoke again, her voice carried the unmistakable tone of someone accustomed to command authority. "For the past 8 years," she said quietly, "I've been serving as a SEAL team commander with Naval Special Warfare Group 1. I'm here at Camp Pendleton as part of an inter-service evaluation program designed to assess cross-training opportunities between Marine and Navy Special Operations units." The words hit the Marines like a physical blow. A SEAL commander, not just a Navy SEAL, but a team commander with 8 years of experience in the most elite special operations unit in the American military. They had been mocking and underestimating someone whose training and capabilities far exceeded their own. The silence that followed Sarah's revelation was deafening. The Marines stood frozen, their minds struggling to process the complete reversal of everything they had believed about the morning's events. The quiet civilian woman they had dismissed and ridiculed was actually one of the most elite soldiers in the entire United States military. Colonel Henderson was the first to recover his composure. "Commander Mitchell," he said formally, "I believe we need to have a more detailed conversation about your evaluation objectives." Sarah nodded, and for the first time since the morning had begun, she allowed her full professional persona to emerge. The transformation was remarkable. The gentle, submissive civilian was completely gone, replaced by an officer whose presence commanded immediate respect and attention. "Yes, sir," she replied. "I think that will be very productive." As the Marines continued to stare in shocked silence, Sarah began walking back toward the course she had just conquered. But now her movement carried the unmistakable bearing of military command, and her assessment of their performance took on an entirely different significance. The morning had begun with Marines laughing at what they thought was an inexperienced civilian. It was ending with the humbling realization that they had just been evaluated and found wanting by one of the most elite soldiers in the United States military. The question now was what Commander Sarah Mitchell's assessment would mean for their future training and their careers. The revelation of Sarah's true identity sent shockwaves through the Marine unit that extended far beyond simple embarrassment. As the full implications of what had just occurred began to sink in, each Marine found themselves reliving every comment they had made and every assumption they had voiced throughout the morning. The woman they had ridiculed as a weak civilian was not only a Navy SEAL, but a team commander with 8 years of experience leading some of the most dangerous operations in modern military history. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez felt his stomach drop as he remembered his patronizing comments about staying back and not interfering with serious military training. He had spoken to a SEAL commander as if she were a tourist who had wandered into the wrong area. The professional humiliation was almost overwhelming. Corporal Jenkins, who had been the most vocal in his mockery of Sarah's appearance and perceived weakness, now found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about assessing military capability. He had spent years learning to size up potential threats and allies, and he had been completely fooled by someone whose job required the ability to blend in and appear harmless. Private Thompson, still nursing his embarrassment from getting stuck in the mud crawl, realized that his rescue had been observed by someone whose expertise in tactical movement far exceeded his own. The thought that Commander Mitchell had probably identified multiple ways he could have avoided his predicament made his face burn with shame. Colonel Henderson, meanwhile, was processing the situation from an entirely different perspective. As a senior officer, he understood the broader implications of having a Navy SEAL commander conducting evaluations at his base. This wasn't just an informal visit or a courtesy observation. It was part of a systematic assessment program that could have significant consequences for his unit's future training and operational assignments. Commander Mitchell, Henderson said formally, his tone now carrying the respect due to her rank and position. I believe my Marines owe you an apology for their behavior this morning. Sarah held up a hand to forestall any forced apologies. Actually, Colonel, their behavior was exactly what I was hoping to observe. Unguarded reactions and natural responses provide much more valuable assessment data than formal presentations. Her professional manner was now fully evident, and the Marines could see the sharp intelligence that had been hidden behind her gentle civilian facade. When she spoke about assessment data and evaluation objectives, her voice carried the authority of someone who had spent years making life and death decisions about personnel and training. Private Martinez finally found the courage to speak. Ma'am, Commander, I don't understand. If you're here to evaluate us, why didn't you just tell us who you were from the beginning? Sarah considered the question carefully before responding. Because I needed to see how you perform when you think nobody important is watching. How you treat perceived civilians, how you respond to unexpected situations, and how you handle challenges to your assumptions about military superiority. The answer hit the Marines like a sledgehammer. They realized that every casual insult, every dismissive comment, and every display of arrogance had been carefully noted and analyzed by someone whose opinion could affect their entire careers. What they had thought was harmless trash talk among themselves had actually been a comprehensive evaluation of their character and professionalism. Lance Corporal Williams, who had made several particularly crude comments about Sarah's physical capabilities, felt sick as he contemplated what those remarks revealed about his attitude toward civilians and women in general. The Marine Corps prided itself on honor and respect, and he had demonstrated neither. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez knew he had to address the situation directly. Commander, speaking for myself and my Marines, we failed to demonstrate the professionalism expected of United States Marines. Our conduct was unacceptable, regardless of who we thought you were. Sarah nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of honest self-assessment that distinguishes good soldiers from great ones, Staff Sergeant. The ability to recognize mistakes and learn from them is crucial for any military unit. But even as she acknowledged Rodriguez's apology, the Marines could see that she was continuing to evaluate their responses. Every word they spoke and every expression they displayed was being processed by someone trained to assess human behavior under pressure. Colonel Henderson decided it was time to address the broader implications of the morning's events. Commander Mitchell, what can you tell me about the scope of your evaluation? Are you assessing individual Marines or our entire training program? Both, Sarah replied without hesitation. Naval Special Warfare is always interested in identifying personnel who might be candidates for advanced training programs. We're also evaluating different branches' approaches to physical conditioning and tactical preparation. The mention of advanced training programs sent a ripple of excitement through the Marines despite their embarrassment. Being selected for special operations training was the dream of every ambitious Marine, and the possibility that their performance might have caught the attention of Navy SEALs was both thrilling and terrifying. Private Thompson, still smarting from his poor performance on the obstacle course, felt compelled to ask the question that was bothering all of them. Commander, did we completely blow our chances by treating you the way we did? Sarah's expression softened slightly, revealing a hint of the warmth she had shown earlier. Private, one of the most important things we look for in potential special operations candidates is the ability to recover from mistakes and adapt to new information. How you handle this situation moving forward is going to be much more important than how you handled it this morning. The relief on the Marines' faces was visible, but Sarah quickly added a qualifying statement. However, the attitudes and assumptions you displayed this morning are significant concerns that would need to be addressed through additional training and evaluation. She was giving them a chance to redeem themselves, but she was also making it clear that their behavior had revealed serious deficiencies in their professional development. The Marines understood that they were being offered an opportunity, but it came with conditions and expectations that would challenge them in ways their standard training had not. Corporal Jenkins decided to take the risk of asking a more detailed question. "Commander, when you were watching us run the course, what did you see that we should have done differently?" It was a tactical question that demonstrated his willingness to learn from someone with superior expertise. Sarah recognized the professional nature of his inquiry and responded accordingly. "Your approach to the obstacles was primarily focused on individual challenges rather than the course as an integrated system," she explained. "Each of you attacked every obstacle as if it existed in isolation, which meant you were constantly starting from zero instead of building momentum and carrying advantages from one challenge to the next." The Marines listened intently as Sarah continued her analysis. Her feedback was detailed and specific, demonstrating a level of tactical understanding that far exceeded anything they had encountered in their standard training. "Additionally," Sarah continued, "your energy management was inefficient. You were using maximum effort on obstacles that could have been completed with moderate effort, which left you depleted for challenges that actually required peak performance." Private Martinez nodded as he began to understand her point. "So we were working harder, not smarter?" "Exactly," Sarah confirmed. "In special operations, efficiency isn't just about completing missions faster. It's about preserving energy and resources for the critical moments when maximum performance is absolutely necessary." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez realized that Commander Mitchell was essentially giving them a masterclass in advanced tactical thinking. Her analysis wasn't just about obstacle course technique. It was about the fundamental principles that separated elite units from standard military personnel. "Commander," Rodriguez said carefully, "would it be possible for you to provide additional guidance on how we could improve our approach to training?" Sarah looked at Colonel Henderson, seeking his approval for an extended training session. The colonel nodded immediately, recognizing that his Marines were being offered access to expertise that money couldn't buy. "I'd be happy to work with your unit, Staff Sergeant," Sarah said. "But I should warn you that SEAL training methodologies are significantly more demanding than standard Marine Corps preparation." The promise of more demanding training actually excited the Marines rather than intimidating them. They had all joined the Corps because they wanted to be challenged, and the opportunity to train with someone from an even more elite unit was exactly the kind of challenge they had been seeking. Corporal Jenkins raised his hand tentatively. "Commander, could you show us the techniques you used on the course? I've never seen anyone move through obstacles like that." Sarah smiled, and the Marines caught a glimpse of the person who existed beneath the professional military persona. "I can do better than that. I can teach you how to develop those techniques for yourselves." She walked back toward the obstacle course, and the Marines followed her with the eager attention of students who had suddenly realized they were in the presence of a master instructor. The dynamic had completely shifted from a morning's adversarial situation to one of genuine learning and mutual respect. "The first thing you need to understand," Sarah explained as they gathered around the initial obstacle, "is that every movement you make should serve multiple purposes. When I approached this first wall, I wasn't just trying to get over it. I was also setting up momentum for the next obstacle and conserving energy for the more demanding challenges later in the course." She demonstrated her technique in slow motion, breaking down each component of her movement and explaining the biomechanical principles that made it effective. The Marines watched with fascination as she revealed the science behind what had appeared to be effortless athleticism. "Your turn," Sarah said to Private Thompson. "Try to replicate the approach, but focus on efficiency rather than speed." Thompson approached the wall using Sarah's technique, and While his execution was imperfect, the improvement was immediately obvious. He cleared the obstacle with less effort and better body positioning than he had managed during his initial attempt. Better, Sarah acknowledged. Now, let's work on linking that technique to your approach to the next obstacle. For the next 2 hours, Commander Mitchell put the Marines through the most intensive and educational training session of their military careers. She broke down every aspect of their performance, from basic movement patterns to advanced tactical applications. Her teaching style was demanding but encouraging, pushing them to exceed their previous limitations while building their confidence in their ability to improve. The transformation in the Marines was remarkable. Not only were they performing better physically, but their understanding of training principles and tactical thinking had advanced dramatically. They were beginning to think like special operations personnel rather than standard infantry soldiers. Colonel Henderson observed the training session with growing admiration for both Commander Mitchell's teaching abilities and his Marines' capacity for adaptation. What had begun as a potentially career-damaging embarrassment was turning into one of the most valuable training experiences his unit had ever received. As the session progressed, the Marines began to understand why Navy SEALs were considered the elite of the elite. It wasn't just their physical capabilities or their advanced equipment. It was their approach to problem solving, their attention to detail, and their ability to find innovative solutions to challenging situations. Private Williams, who had struggled with the rope traverse during his initial attempt, found himself completing the obstacle with relative ease using Sarah's techniques. The improvement was so dramatic that he could hardly believe he was the same person who had nearly fallen earlier in the morning. "Commander," Williams said breathlessly after completing his successful traverse, "how long does it take to master these techniques?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "That depends on your definition of mastery. You can become proficient enough to significantly improve your performance in a few weeks of focused practice. True mastery takes years of constant refinement and adaptation to new challenges." The answer reinforced the Marines' growing understanding of the gap between their current capabilities and true special operations excellence. But rather than discouraging them, it motivated them to work harder and commit more fully to their training. As the afternoon wore on, Commander Mitchell introduced increasingly advanced concepts and techniques. She taught them about tactical breathing, advanced body mechanics, and the psychological aspects of performance under stress. Each lesson built upon the previous ones, creating a comprehensive foundation for elite-level performance. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez found himself taking detailed notes, recognizing that the information Sarah was sharing could revolutionize his unit's entire approach to training. The principles she was teaching weren't just applicable to obstacle courses. They could be applied to every aspect of military performance. "The most important thing to remember," Sarah emphasized as the training session neared its conclusion, "is that physical techniques are only part of the equation. Mental preparation and tactical thinking are equally important for achieving elite performance." She paused to look at each Marine individually, assessing their receptiveness to her instruction and their potential for continued improvement. What she saw pleased her. The arrogant young soldiers from the morning had been replaced by focused, dedicated students who were eager to push themselves to new levels of excellence. Corporal Jenkins, who had been the most vocal in his initial mockery of Sarah's capabilities, now found himself wondering if he might actually have the potential to qualify for special operations training. The possibility seemed both exciting and terrifying. "Commander," Jenkins said respectfully, "what would someone need to do to be considered for SEAL training?" Sarah's expression became more serious. "The physical requirements are just the starting point. We're looking for people who can think creatively under pressure, work effectively as part of a team, and maintain their composure in life-threatening situations. Most importantly, we need people who are committed to continuous improvement and willing to sacrifice personal comfort for mission success." The Marines absorbed her words carefully, understanding that she was describing qualities that went far beyond basic military competence. She was talking about the characteristics that separated good soldiers from legendary ones. As the training session concluded, Colonel Henderson approached Commander Mitchell with obvious appreciation. "Commander, this has been extraordinarily valuable for my Marines. Is there any way we could arrange for additional training opportunities?" Sarah smiled. "Colonel, that's exactly what I was hoping you would ask. Based on what I've observed today, I think several of your Marines might benefit from exposure to more advanced training programs." The implication was clear, and the Marines felt their hearts race with anticipation. Commander Mitchell was suggesting that some of them might be candidates for special operations selection. It was an opportunity that could transform their entire military careers. But even as they contemplated the possibilities, the Marines remained acutely aware of how close they had come to missing this opportunity entirely. Their initial behavior toward Commander Mitchell could easily have resulted in a negative evaluation that would have closed doors rather than opening them. Private Thompson, still grateful for Sarah's patient instruction despite his earlier poor performance, felt compelled to address the elephant in the room. "Commander, we were completely out of line this morning. We don't deserve the patience and instruction you've shown us." Sarah's response surprised them with its understanding. "Private, one of the first things you learn in special operations is that initial impressions can be completely wrong. The enemy you underestimate might be the one who kills you, and the ally you dismiss might be the one who saves your life." Today was a lesson in looking beyond surface appearances. Her words carried the weight of hard-earned experience, and the Marines realized she was sharing wisdom that had been paid for with blood and risk in real combat situations. The morning's training exercise suddenly took on much greater significance as a preparation for actual life and death decisions. As the group prepared to conclude the day's activities, Commander Mitchell had one final surprise for the Marines. "Before I leave," she announced, "I want to offer each of you the opportunity to participate in a joint training exercise that Naval Special Warfare is conducting next month. It's designed to evaluate cross-service cooperation and identify personnel for advanced training programs." The invitation was beyond anything the Marines had dared to hope for. A joint training exercise with Navy SEALs would be the opportunity of a lifetime, regardless of whether it led to selection for special operations. Just the experience of working alongside the most elite units in the military would be invaluable for their professional development. Colonel Henderson immediately endorsed the invitation. "Commander, my Marines would be honored to participate. This is exactly the kind of inter-service cooperation that makes our military stronger." But Sarah wasn't finished with her surprises. "There's one more thing," she continued. "Part of the evaluation for this exercise will be based on leadership potential and the ability to train and develop other personnel. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, I'd like you to consider applying for our Advanced Leadership Development Program." The offer left Rodriguez speechless. The SEAL Advanced Leadership Development Program was legendary within the special operations community, and selection for the program was considered one of the highest honors available to military personnel. As the Marines stood in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of the opportunities that had just been presented to them, Commander Mitchell began gathering her equipment and preparing to leave. The woman who had arrived that morning as an unassuming civilian observer was departing as someone who had fundamentally changed their understanding of excellence and their vision of their own potential. "Commander," Corporal Jenkins called out as she prepared to leave. "Thank you for everything. We won't forget this." Sarah turned back to face the Marines one final time, and her smile carried the warmth of genuine pride in their transformation. "Just remember that this is only the beginning. The real work starts now, when you take what you've learned and push yourselves to become better than you ever thought possible." As her vehicle disappeared into the distance, the Marines remained standing near the obstacle course, still trying to fully comprehend everything that had transpired. They had begun the day as cocky young soldiers who thought they understood their own capabilities and limitations. They were ending it as humbled students who had been given a glimpse of what true excellence looked like and an opportunity to pursue it for themselves. The course that had challenged them so severely in the morning now looked different to their trained eyes. They could see the inefficiencies in their previous approach, and they understood the principles that would allow them to perform at a much higher level. But more importantly, they had learned that their assumptions about people and situations could be completely wrong, and that true strength often came disguised as vulnerability. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez looked at his Marines and saw something in their eyes that hadn't been there before. The arrogance and casual superiority had been replaced by genuine humility and hunger for improvement. They had been transformed by their encounter with someone whose expertise far exceeded their own, and they were ready to do whatever it took to earn the opportunities they had been offered. The morning's laughter had been based on ignorance and false assumptions. The day's conclusion was marked by respect, admiration, and a determination to prove worthy of the trust that Commander Mitchell had placed in them. They had learned the most valuable lesson any soldier could learn, that there was always someone better, and that true growth came from seeking out those people and learning everything possible from them. As they walked back toward their barracks, each Marine was already planning how they would prepare for the challenges ahead. The joint training exercise would be their chance to prove that the morning's lesson had been learned, and that they were ready to transform themselves from good Marines into something much more exceptional. 3 weeks after their transformative encounter with Commander Sarah Mitchell, the Marine unit had undergone a complete metamorphosis. The joint training exercise was scheduled to begin in just 5 days, and every aspect of their preparation reflected the profound lessons they had learned about excellence, humility, and the pursuit of continuous improvement. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had implemented a completely new training regimen based on the principles Commander Mitchell had shared with them. Instead of focusing purely on individual physical performance, the Marines now approached every exercise as an integrated system that required tactical thinking, energy management, and seamless teamwork. The results had been remarkable, with performance improvements that exceeded even their most optimistic expectations. Private Thompson, who had been so thoroughly embarrassed by his performance on the mud crawl, had become one of the most dedicated students of the new techniques. He spent hours after regular training sessions practicing the movement patterns Sarah had demonstrated, and his improvement had been nothing short of extraordinary. The Marine who had once required rescue from a simple obstacle was now completing the entire course faster than he had ever imagined possible. Corporal Jenkins had undergone perhaps the most significant transformation of all. The arrogant young Marine who had mocked Commander Mitchell's appearance had evolved into a thoughtful leader who understood the danger of making assumptions based on superficial observations. His new approach to evaluating people and situations had earned him recognition from his superiors and respect from his peers. The entire unit had embraced the concept that true strength often appeared in unexpected forms, and that the ability to recognize and learn from superior expertise was a mark of wisdom rather than weakness. They had internalized Commander Mitchell's lesson that initial impressions could be completely misleading, and that the most dangerous mistake a soldier could make was underestimating someone based on appearance or preconceptions. Lance Corporal Williams had taken the lesson particularly to heart, recognizing that his casual dismissal of civilians and women had revealed serious character flaws that could compromise his effectiveness as a Marine. He had committed himself to treating every person with the respect due to a potential instructor or ally, understanding that valuable lessons could come from the most unexpected sources. Private Martinez had focused on developing the analytical skills that Commander Mitchell had demonstrated during her assessment of their performance. He had learned to break down complex challenges into component parts and identify opportunities for efficiency improvements that weren't immediately obvious. His newfound ability to think systematically about tactical problems had impressed his instructors and positioned him as a candidate for advanced leadership training. The Marines' physical conditioning had improved dramatically as well, but the more significant change was in their mental approach to challenges. They no longer saw obstacles as tests to be endured through brute force and determination. Instead, they approached each challenge as a problem to be solved through intelligence, technique, and strategic thinking. Colonel Henderson had been monitoring their progress with growing pride and amazement. The unit that had embarrassed itself through unprofessional behavior just weeks earlier had transformed into one of the most promising groups he had ever commanded. Their dedication to improvement and their willingness to acknowledge their limitations while striving for excellence had marked them as Marines with extraordinary potential. The announcement that Commander Mitchell would be personally overseeing the joint training exercise had generated both excitement and nervous anticipation among the Marines. They would have the opportunity to demonstrate their improvement and commitment to the principles she had taught them, but they would also be evaluated against the highest standards in military performance. Rodriguez had received additional details about the joint training exercise that both thrilled and intimidated him. The evaluation would include not only physical performance, but also leadership assessment, tactical decision-making under pressure, and the ability to integrate effectively with special operations personnel. It was exactly the kind of comprehensive evaluation that could launch exceptional military careers or reveal fundamental limitations that would close doors to advancement. The Marines had spent countless hours studying special operations tactics and procedures, trying to understand the mindset and approach that separated elite units from standard military personnel. They had come to appreciate that the difference wasn't just in training or equipment, but in the fundamental way that special operations soldiers approach problems and challenges. Commander Mitchell's surprise announcement that she would be conducting preliminary individual assessments before the joint exercise had sent the Marines into a frenzy of preparation. They understood that these assessments would determine not only whether they could participate in the joint exercise, but also whether they would be considered for the advanced training opportunities she had mentioned. On the morning of the preliminary assessments, the Marines assembled with a mixture of confidence and anxiety that reflected their transformation over the previous weeks. They were no longer the cocky young soldiers who had dismissed Commander Mitchell based on her appearance. They were disciplined professionals who understood that they were about to be evaluated by someone whose expertise far exceeded their own. Commander Mitchell arrived at precisely the scheduled time, and the Marines immediately noticed something different about her appearance. Instead of the civilian clothes she had worn during her initial observation, she was now dressed in Navy Special Operations utilities that clearly displayed her rank and decorations. The transformation was as dramatic as their own, revealing the true extent of her military bearing and professional accomplishments. Her uniform told the story of an extraordinary military career. Ribbons and insignia indicated multiple combat deployments, advanced training certifications, and commendations for exceptional performance under fire. The Marines realized they were in the presence of not just a SEAL commander, but a genuine war hero who had earned her position through years of exceptional service in the most demanding conditions. Marines, Commander Mitchell announced formally, I'm here to conduct individual assessments that will determine your eligibility for the joint training exercise and consideration for advanced training programs. These evaluations will test not only your physical capabilities, but also your tactical thinking, leadership potential, and ability to adapt to new challenges. The Marines stood at attention with the sharp precision they had developed through weeks of intensified training. Their bearing reflected the transformation they had undergone, demonstrating a level of military professionalism that would have been impossible just weeks earlier. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was the first to be called for his individual assessment. As the senior non-commissioned officer in the unit, his evaluation would be the most comprehensive and would include leadership scenarios that would test his ability to command special operations personnel in combat situations. Rodriguez followed Commander Mitchell to a separate training area where she had set up a complex scenario involving multiple objectives and time constraints. The exercise was designed to evaluate his decision-making process under pressure and his ability to prioritize competing demands while maintaining situational awareness. Staff Sergeant, Commander Mitchell explained, you have 30 minutes to plan and execute a mission that includes reconnaissance, target elimination, and extraction while avoiding detection by enemy forces. You'll have access to intelligence reports and tactical support options, but all decisions will be yours to make. The scenario was unlike anything Rodriguez had encountered in his previous training. It required him to think like a special operations commander rather than a standard Marine infantry leader. He had to consider factors like civilian casualties, political implications, and long-term strategic consequences while developing a tactical plan that could be executed under combat conditions. As Rodriguez worked through the scenario, Commander Mitchell observed his thought process with the analytical intensity they had all learned to recognize. She was evaluating not just his final decisions, but the reasoning behind those decisions and his ability to adapt his plans as new information became available. The exercise challenged Rodriguez in ways that revealed both his strengths and his areas for improvement. His basic tactical knowledge was sound, but his approach to complex multi-objective missions needed refinement. Most importantly, his willingness to acknowledge uncertainty and seek additional information demonstrated the kind of intellectual humility that was essential for special operations leadership. When Rodriguez completed the assessment, Commander Mitchell provided detailed feedback that was both encouraging and challenging. Staff Sergeant, your tactical fundamentals are solid, and your leadership instincts are well developed. However, special operations require a level of creative thinking and risk management that goes beyond standard military training. You have the potential to develop these skills, but it will require significant additional education and practice. The feedback was exactly what Rodriguez had hoped to hear. Commander Mitchell was confirming that he had the foundation necessary for advanced training while being honest about the work required to reach elite performance levels. It was the kind of direct professional assessment that allowed him to make informed decisions about his career development. Private Thompson was next to be evaluated, and his assessment focused on the dramatic improvement he had demonstrated in technical skills and physical performance. Commander Mitchell wanted to determine whether his transformation was sustainable and whether he possessed the mental toughness necessary for special operations training. Thompson's individual assessment included both physical challenges and psychological stress tests designed to reveal how he responded when pushed beyond his comfort zone. The exercises were designed to simulate the kind of pressure that special operations personnel faced during actual missions, where failure could result in death or capture. Commander Mitchell watched Thompson work through the assessment with growing respect for the young Marine's dedication and improvement. His techniques were now refined and efficient, his tactical thinking was developing nicely, and his determination was obviously genuine. Most importantly, he had learned to analyze his own performance objectively and identify areas for improvement without external prompting. Private Thompson, Commander Mitchell said when the assessment was complete, "Your improvement over the past 3 weeks has been exceptional. You've demonstrated that you have the work ethic and coachability that are essential for advanced training. However, special operations require years of continuous development, and early success is no guarantee of long-term achievement." Thompson accepted the feedback with the maturity he had developed during his transformation. He understood that Commander Mitchell was offering him an opportunity while also ensuring that he had realistic expectations about the challenges ahead. Corporal Jenkins' assessment focused particularly on his leadership potential and his ability to work effectively with personnel from other services and backgrounds. His initial behavior toward Commander Mitchell had revealed attitude problems that could be disqualifying for special operations service, and she needed to determine whether his apparent transformation was genuine. The exercises Jenkins faced included scenarios where he had to lead mixed teams of Marines and Navy personnel through complex tactical situations. The challenges were designed to reveal whether he could set aside service rivalries and personal prejudices to focus on mission accomplishment and team effectiveness. Commander Mitchell was pleased to observe that Jenkins' transformation appeared to be authentic and sustainable. His approach to leadership had evolved from authoritarian command to collaborative problem-solving, and his ability to adapt to working with unfamiliar personnel had improved dramatically. Most importantly, He had developed genuine respect for expertise regardless of its source. Corporal Jenkins, Commander Mitchell concluded, "Your leadership potential is significant, and your willingness to acknowledge and correct your mistakes demonstrates the kind of character that special operations units require." However, leadership at the special operations level involves responsibilities and consequences that go far beyond anything you've experienced in standard military service. The assessment continued throughout the day, with each Marine facing individualized challenges designed to reveal their specific strengths and limitations. Lance Corporal Williams was tested on his ability to work effectively in diverse teams and his capacity for maintaining respect and professionalism in challenging interpersonal situations. Private Martinez faced exercises that evaluated his analytical thinking and his potential for developing the kind of strategic perspective that special operations planning required. His assessment included scenarios where tactical success had to be balanced against political and strategic considerations. By the end of the day, Commander Mitchell had gathered comprehensive data on each Marine's capabilities and potential. Her assessments had revealed significant improvement across the entire unit, but also identified the specific areas where additional development would be necessary for those who wanted to pursue special operations careers. When the Marines assembled for her final briefing, Commander Mitchell's expression